how climate change is actually amplifying, accelerating the danger of worldwide fascism. I start out with this little factoid, and you know, it largely was not reported in the American press. The government of the Netherlands fell last week. I mean, just that was it. You know, the prime minister or president, I don't recall what they call that person in the Netherlands, but he just resigned, and because he couldn't hold together his coalition. And the issue that tipped this, that is roiling Dutch politics right now, is immigration. Specifically, brown Muslim Syrians fleeing the 2015 violence inflicted on that country by Russia into Europe and ultimately making their way into Holland. And you've got a bunch of people there quite upset about it. If Putin wanted to destroy democracy in Europe, way back in 2013, he couldn't have picked a better strategy. And I mean, I don't think that he intended it to work out this way, his Syria strategy, but it certainly has. And it's a cautionary tale, I think, for all of us. What happened was back in 2010, we had in December, in fact, December 17th, 2010, a young man by the name of Mohammed Bouazizi lit himself on fire. He was a street vendor in Tunisia, one of these northern African countries, where climate change has been biting really, really hard. The desert has moved south in northern Africa by as much as 100 miles, particularly in Syria. In Syria, it displaced more than 1 million farmers in the previous 10 years off land that had been farmland and is now just scrub desert, off that land and into the cities. Aleppo, it was the biggest city in Syria, kind of the New York City of Syria, and Damascus was the second largest city. And these farmers, as refugees, just flowed, I mean, literally 1 million Syrians within their own country, refugees within their own country, you know, moved into these cities. And in 2011, 2012, 2013, started demanding housing, medical care, food, and jobs, or if no jobs, at least welfare. You know, we can't survive on the streets like this, they were essentially saying. And Bashar al-Assad, being the psychopathic dictator that he is, his response to this was to tell his troops to fire on these people with live ammunition. Well, that produced an immediate blowback and essentially a call for revolution inside Syria, and the rebels took Aleppo. It would be like the Proud Boys taking New York City. And you know, if you know our government had become some kind of tyranny of some sort, and because actually it would be more like George Washington taking Newark, you know, back in 1777, I believe it was. But in any case, what happened then was, as Russia came in, Russia could not allow the Assad government to fall because there are a couple of ports, two major deep water ports. I think Tartus is one of them. I'd have to look at a map and show you or name them, but there's these two major cities that are deep water ports. And there were over 15 Russian warships. I mean, battleships, aircraft carriers, submarines, all, you know, basically died. This is their deep water port on the Mediterranean. And they couldn't afford to lose it. So they had to defend the Assad government, even though Assad had done the most stupid thing you can do, which is, you know, firing on your own people, when he could have solved the problem by just throwing some money at them. You know, just saying, okay, well, here's some housing, here's some food. So Putin came in, and Prigozhin came in and leveled Aleppo. It would be like reducing New York City to rubble, and flattened about 1/3 of Damascus, these rebel-held areas, and just went on a rampage. The result of that was about 5 million Syrians fled Syria. And, you know, Syria is not that far from Italy and Greece, and they made their way up into Europe. On top of that, we had Bush's illegal and criminal wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and which produced another million or so refugees, Iraqi and Afghanistani refugees, who also fled into Europe. And so Europe was experiencing this, white Christian Europe was experiencing this influx of brown Muslim people. Now, this is one of the legacies of 5 centuries of empire building and theft from more equatorial countries, warmer climate countries, by people from colder climate countries, specifically Northern Europe and ultimately the United States. Colonialism is that the concentration of wealth is in the north and the south, the northern part of the northern hemisphere, the southern part of the southern hemisphere, and is largely white. And the concentration of poverty is in the equatorial belts, above and below the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, and is largely people of color. And as these equatorial regions, they're predicting that within 25 years, 3 billion people will be unable to live where they live right now because of climate change. And it's not going to be Northern Europe and Southern South America and Southern Asia and Australia. It's going to be the equatorial regions. It's going to be, these mid-latitude, well, it's not even mid-latitudes. I guess they're called equatorial latitudes. And what we're seeing right now is multiple governments. The reason that Sweden has a right-wing prime minister, the reason that Italy has a fascist prime minister, the reason that there's a growing and powerful fascist movement, neo-fascist movement in Germany, Alles für Deutschland, the Le Pen movement in France. The reason that the Dutch government fell last week, the reason that there's a very good chance that a fascist government will take over Spain for the first time since Franco died in 1975. On July 23rd, in a week and a half, 2 weeks, when the Spanish elections are going to be held, is because of refugees. It's because of, it's because, A, you get all these, people of different colors and different religions, different races, different religions in the country, and then B, these right-wing politicians use racism to demagogue this. We're seeing the exact same thing in the United States, where down in Guatemala, you're seeing desertification has driven hundreds of thousands of subsistence farmers off their farms into the cities and ultimately up to the United States. A lot of Guatemalan refugees in the United States because climate change is hitting Guatemala harder than pretty much any other area in Central America. Although our policies in the region, Reagan's policies of destabilizing El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua by supporting right-wing death squads and right-wing governments in those areas, have left those governments so fragile that they can't deal with their own internal refugees. So they're shipping them here. And then the Republicans, have spent the last 10 years, 12 years, 14 years, since Obama's election, basically, in 2008, yelling and squealing about how Democrats have opened the border. Well, Democrats didn't open the border. But that message, these news stories from these literally hundreds of articles and tweets and fake Facebook posts and speeches by exclusively Republican politicians claiming that the southern U.S. border is open, is wide open. It's wide open. Those stories are being used by coyotes and human smugglers and, just desperate people to encourage people to come to the southern border, the southern U.S. border, creating a crisis. Now, this is being done for political purposes here in the United States, but the same thing is happening in Europe. The reason Viktor Orban runs Hungary right now is because in 2010, when he ran for election, his campaign slogan was "Build a Wall." He was going to build a wall across the southern border of Hungary to stop Syrian refugees from coming in from the south. And by the way, he did it. And now, there's this NATO meeting going on, and he may be the guy acting on behalf of Vladimir Putin who blocks Sweden's membership in NATO. It's getting really wild. But it all comes back to the refugee crisis being exploited by racists, driving the rise in right-wing power structures and right-wing political parties throughout Europe and in the Americas. And what's driving all of this is climate change. And this is just a preview. Like I said, in 25 years, there's going to be 3 billion people moving from where they are because where they live is not inhabitable any longer. We need to be working with these governments. We need to help harden these democracies. We need to be pushing back on these right-wing movements. And we need to be stopping climate change tomorrow or yesterday. There's just no more time. You can read the whole thing over at HartmannReport.com. It's called How Climate Change Accelerates the Danger of Worldwide Fascism.